There's a new number one pick trending for the NBA draft, and his name is not Donovan Clingan. You're Locked On UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the Yukon Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we get into the show, a couple of quick notes. The support on YouTube has been amazing. I'd love to see all of my subscribers also download the audio version wherever you get your podcast. It's a huge help to me and to the Locked On UConn audience, helping us grow. So if you can do me two quick favors. First, click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Then head over to Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and hit that follow button. This way, you'll never miss a moment of Locked On UConn. Help us continue to bring the content you love. Your support means everything to me. And if you're listening in an audio device, car phone, transistor radio, wherever it is, please take a moment to drop us a 5-star review. Special shout out to my everydayers. We have now rolled out what we're calling our everydayer or insider program. You can get a 14-day free trial of Subtext to receive the latest insights, behind-the-scenes content, exclusive updates on UConn basketball. Join our community for direct access to me, special Q&A sessions. It'll be great on game day. We can chat about specific plays. We'll be doing giveaways, gear, some signed merchandise, and more. Also, I'm working out a percentage of all of my proceeds from the revenue I get from the Locked On UConn podcast going to Bleeding Blue for Good. That helps our NIL, helps you show that I am not just about taking money for this. I really want to help the UConn program continue to be amazing. Their success is my success. Our success as a community is what's important to me. That subscription-based model is live now. So go get your 14-day free trial today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking us all up, for all of us, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Well, could there be a new number one not named Donovan Clingan? I've said this a few different times on this show and others that I've been on in terms of these UConn prospects. Do I think Donovan Clingan ultimately goes number one? Probably. But should it surprise us that Stephon Castle's name is being floated as the new number one pick in the draft? I've always been on record saying he's the most talented all-around player in this draft. And considering the consensus that there isn't a clear number one, you go with the most talented player that is in the fold, and you let the chips fall where they may. And I think Steph is that guy. I think Steph doesn't have that dog in him. I think, to quote the late, great Logo, Jerry West, he's a wolf, and I eat dogs. That's a Jerry West quote. People talk about dogs. I'm a wolf. I eat dogs. I still remember when I knew that Steph was special. Early in the year, he either took a charge or made an and one, and he was on the ground, like facing up when people came over to him. And an opposing player tried to come pick him up from, obviously, the opposing team. And he said, "Get away from me. Don't touch me." Something to that effect. Came through on the TV. They zoomed in right away. I mean, I still get chills talking about that because he waited for his teammates to come pick him up. And I was like, damn, this kid doesn't play. And I was sold ever since. He continues to do just whatever he wants. And at the next level, all of his ability is going to come out. Playmaking. He's a high feel playmaker. He controls tempo, changes rhythm, starts and stops, decelerates with ease. Ever heard of the phrase stopping on a dime? That's Stephon Castle to a T. Passing. He made some of the most incredible passes you've ever seen at the college level. Space it out even more. All of that is going to be accentuated. Simple plays, skip passes, kickouts, interior feeds. Thrives in pick and roll situations. Finishing. He's one of the best finishers in all of college basketball, if not the best, finishing through contact. It was so good that there were times in games where he had some iffy moments where you were like, man, he usually finishes that. And it's usually with either hand. Shooting potential. Showed some flashes of being a go-to scorer when his jumper was falling, his soft touch on floaters, layups, all of that is improved, and improving on the free throw line was stark from start to finish. So it kind of reminds me of a guy who has a golden arm, but just doesn't know how to put it where he wants it. And all the coach really has to do is say, just trust it. And right now, when Steph finally trusts his shot, because that form is perfect, he's going to affect the game in so many different ways. When he starts making threes, that's where that elite ability will grow even more. Where I've talked about his ceiling as being an MVP type SGA level player. If you don't know who SGA is, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Oklahoma City Thunder came in third in the MVP voting this past season. Defense, he's a tone setter on the ball, defending with size, versatility, giving that strong effort. He wouldn't be on UConn if he wasn't giving strong effort. He's an effective both on the ball and off the ball defender. Overall, he's a high impact player. We just talked about all of the reasons why. Significant upside if his shooting consistency continues to improve, and I think it will. So don't be surprised if Stephon goes number one, because let's face it, if he was on a crappy Georgetown team, or even put him on a above average Creighton team, where he's the primary scorer and he dominates college basketball, and he's clearly head and shoulders would be the number one pick in the draft. My money is on him at plus 1,400. Definitely worth throwing $10 on. Why not? He's definitely the type of player that wouldn't surprise me if he goes number one. We'll talk GOAT talk that took over UConn Twitter and took it over by storm. Coming up after this. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down and we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep those sports going whenever I want. And all I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone. Every day, all summer long, I'll tell you what, I really get on those UConn futures. I've been awful with picking on, Red Sox, Yankee games, daily NBA Finals games, but I won all my futures thanks to UConn. So if you are in on those UConn three-peats, maybe a double dip parlay with the women title futures right now, get your best odds. Probably shouldn't bet on any baseball because last night, anything I say to you daily-wise, do the opposite. So maybe you don't bet on Steph Castle being the number one pick. Either way, go over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Okay, let's talk GOAT talk. And usually I stay away from these conversations, but the interaction on Twitter over the last, I think it was 8 days. Let's go to the notes here. This was from a Twitter handle at WalkRightEar. I think everyone knows who that is. If you don't, it's literally at WalkRightIer. He wrote this on June 17th. And this was the Field of 64 all-decade team debacle, where they showed like guys from different eras and who would win between Kentucky, UConn, and I forget, it might have been Duke, right? So this was a direct quote. Today's Field of 68 all-decade team debacle prompted me to launch a project I planned for this offseason. Every offseason, UConn fans argue about who the greatest players in UConn basketball history are. This year, I want to systematically poll UConn Twitter to see who makes a consensus list. Over the next week, anyone who is interested should send me their top 10 greatest UConn men's basketball players of all time, either in the comments or DMs, and using the same methodology as the AP poll. So, like, he broke it down where he had 10 points for a first place vote, 9 for a second, down all the way to 10. He compiled the results, and we'll see where we end up. So players currently on the roster for 24-25 season will not be considered for the purpose of this. So like someone like Alex Caravan could not be eligible. Obviously, trolling ballots and ballots from non-UConn fans will be rejected. Votes are due by Tuesday, June 25th, which was yesterday. Happy ranking, and well, as they say in the business, the results are in. And it caused quite a stir. I think for the most part, we got it right as a fan base. But let's go over some honorable mentions from first 15 to 11. And we'll talk about each player and whether I agree or disagree. And I'll preface it right away with this. In a debate of this kind, There are no wrong or right answers. No one's judging you. This isn't a debate for who gets to win. If you think you have a better debate than someone on Twitter, like Matt Edwards has been on our program, so him and I had a debate over who the best player of UConn history is. I think his viewpoint, he's been around 10 years longer than me. I have to give him some historical deference to the 89-90 team. He was more in high school when I was in middle school for that time. So like those type of conversations, just be respectful of each other's opinions. Like first and foremost, if you think Chris Smith, who's the greatest scorer in UConn history, should be in the top 5, you're not wrong. If you think Andre Jackson, who didn't make the top 10 list, but was somewhere around 16th, I believe, should be in that top 10, you also have a right opinion. I may not agree with you, but I also am not going to, we're not going to get into an argument that has like vitriol over a team that we all love and want to see succeed. So let's look at 15 through 11. With the 15th player on the list was Cliff Robinson. Was a 1988 National Invitational NIT Tournament Championship, was like the first championship of consequence for UConn. He was named the All-Tournament team. He was also on the UConn's All-Century men's basketball team. And he passed away recently. I don't remember, not so recently, but a few years ago. RIP to Cliff Robinson. Uncle Cliffy had a great NBA career as well. Fantastic player. Don't have a problem with where he is. I don't have a problem with any of these, but I'm just kind of going through it. 14 on the list, Rudy Gay. Some people really had him higher, and I think that's kind of indicative of how many great players we've had. He was the Big East Rookie of the Year, I think co-Rookie of the Year award. He was a great all-around player, like almost 50% from the field, was a good outside shooter, was a unanimous Big East all-rookie team selection, was named National Freshman of the Year by the Sporting News. I think he led them to 30-3 record, and obviously was a part of the worst tournament loss in UConn history, where they lost to George Mason. So I think I ding Rudy because of that, but that's just because of this. My brain just, every time I think about that game, it frustrates me. So nothing that, I don't think there's anything that Rudy can do, because listen, you're only one player. So one of the best players in UConn history. Where else? Let's look at this. Also, so that was at 15, 14. So 13 was Khalid El-Amin, 1999 national champion. We all know him for his clutch free throws against Duke. And I always remember him as before the game saying, we're going to shock the world. So cool. I know that he did more. I'm prefacing this. My show is only 30 minutes. So if you're like, Khalid El-Amin did X, Y, and Z, hit me up in the comments. Subscribe to Insider. We'll have a chat about it offline. Adama Sanogo was 12. Most valuable player of the Final Four, 2023. Also a national champion. Phenomenal player. Should definitely be on the NBA roster. Dominated the G League. Probably think he had 2021 game in his two-way situation when he was with the Bulls this year. I mean, Adama is just like, talk about a guy that progressed over the years, right? And reached his full potential. Phenomenal player. Would have zero issue if he ended up in the top 10. And then 11, this one was the biggest. He wasn't in my top 10. Caron Butler, he was number 11 on this list. He led the Huskies to both a regular season and tournament Big East title, was named Big East Tournament MVP, pretty big deal, was named co-Big East Player of the Year along with Pittsburgh's Brandon Knight, was a second-team All-American. And I think this is the difference between when I think of Caron and someone like Rudy. Similar path. They both made it to the Elite Eight. That's the farthest that both of them went, and then they went pro. But in Caron's sophomore year, he went absolutely ham on the team that ended up winning the national championship, the Maryland Terrapins, led by Juan Dixon, Juan Dixon, I don't know if he's still coaching in the MEAC, but I've seen him coach, and that dude gets more technicals than Dan Hurley ever thought of. So shout out Juan Dixon. But in that game against Maryland, he had 32 points. They lost a really close game. I think it was like 6-8 points. And, Butler declared for the NBA draft. Phenomenal career. Still waiting for that Mark Wahlberg movie on Caron's career life before basketball. So, that was at the 11th. And we can talk about the guys who didn't make that like just the honorable mention, so to speak, like 15 through 11. Some of my favorite names on this list: Andre Jackson was 16th, Hashim Thabit 17, Jordan Hawkins made that list of it was in the top 20, 19 for the older folks. Corny Thompson was 20th, also one of my favorite Huskies of all time, and touched my top 10. Didn't make the top 10, but it was a lot closer than this. And Duff Hennefeld, even though he played 1 year, he even got a number 1 vote because what our guy did here is he kind of put this list out. You could find it on, if you go on Twitter, he has a list, like a document list where you can go to and look at where everyone had people. Like if you look at the honorable mentions, like from 16 to like 36, most of their rankings are, the highest ranking was like 4 would be the highest one. And then the Duff Hennefeld is 1. Like that's crazy because he was so responsible for so much in that dream season. So I see that. I don't know who ranked him 1, but much respect. One of my favorite players of all time. You got Ryan Boatwright, who's in the Stars of Stores. Cam Spencer comes in at 24. Boatwright was 23. Another Israeli connection, Duran Sheffer, Tate George, Jeremy Lamb, the wonderful and talented Charlie Villanueva. Please come on the podcast, Charlie. Would love to have you. Jalen Adams, Christian Vital, Scott Burrell. Good Lord. Scott Burrell was an incredible athlete. Phenomenal basketball player. Stephon Castle gets the list on 35. Kevin Freeman and Amita Brima. So like so many cool names to think about and talk through with this amazing list. So I really appreciate our guy here that did this. Are you watching Fox Sports on ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you daily to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube with the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, I'll tell you one thing. You're not going to get a GOAT talk list for UConn of all time on ESPN or Fox Sports. That's for sure. So got to go to our guys on Twitter and then, of course, the Locked On UConn. We'll talk the final 5 on the GOAT list coming up. And before we do that, who do we have here? Who is there from 6 to 10? 10 was Ben Gordon. Incredible player. Donovan CLINGAN, number 9. Chris Smith, all-time leading scorer. Donyell Marshall, All-American. Phenomenal player. Saw him score 42 points at the Madison Square Garden against, I believe, St. John's. And then Tristan Newton. We have so many amazing players. It's so hard. We could do a 5-hour show and break down each player and their significance of value to UConn and what they did for this program. We're going to talk about these guys a little more and unveil, if you haven't seen the poll, the top 5 coming up after this. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only. Available to U.S. customers. Okay, we're back on Locked On UConn. We had the GOAT talk that took UConn Twitter by storm. I have to say, the final list, and we'll get through it here, is pretty damn accurate in my opinion. And then I'll dredge up who I had as in my top 10. I think I have Khalid El-Amin in my top 10. That might be the only difference. I didn't have Ben Gordon, who, by the way, was number 10. Ben, I love you. Love to see you back at UConn celebrating the 2004 championship. Open-ended invitation to the podcast. Would love to have you. Was the number 3 pick in the draft, Chicago Bulls. I think he had 50 in a playoff game one time. I know we're only talking about UConn, but just all of the memories that I have of Ben Gordon are, what was it? Madison Square Gordon was one of his nicknames. Just a phenomenal player. Donovan Clingan at 9 could be the number 1 pick in the NBA draft. 2-time national champion, most impactful player in college basketball last year. Easily in the top 10. Chris Smith, all-time leading scorer. I don't think there's a top 10 list without Chris Smith. I know for some of the younger players or younger people that watch this or younger people out there in UConn Twitter, you can't leave off the guy who has the most points ever scored in a UConn jersey or a Connecticut jersey in a top 10 debate. I don't care if they never won anything in the time he was there. He was on some phenomenal teams. He scored a ton of points, was an NBA draft pick, and there's no way you can keep him off. Number 7, Donyell Marshall. Donyell was kind of the first of the, in my opinion, again, anything I say is always my opinion, by the way, was one of the first players that I feel like Calhoun had that took the next step, right? Clifford Robinson was the type of player like the same as Donyell, long, could score, could stretch a defense, could play great defense. But with Donyell, it was on an even higher level. And he showed it, being an All-American. His teams overall underachieved in terms of championships, but just can't take away the type of impact that Donyell had, not only for himself, but also for the program at large in Jim Calhoun. Shout out Donyell Marshall, assistant coach for the Greensboro Swarm here locally for me in Greensboro, North Carolina. So Donyell, if you see this, again, would love to have you on talking memories of UConn. And number 6, Tristan Newton. Obviously, not anything about being a prisoner of the moment. Guy transferred here, won two national championships, was the most outstanding player in the Final Four, was like an all-tournament player, easily should have been the Big East Player of the Year. No disrespect to Devin Carter. Actually, disrespect to Devin Carter because you're not the player that Tristan Newton is. I don't care where you go in the top 10, or if you go in the top 10 in the NBA draft. Tristan Newton was a better college basketball player than you. We all know it. Don't care. Sit with that. And then let's get to the top 5. Again, this list is pretty extensive. Number 5, Shabazz Napier, 2-time national champion. That 14 run, that's a ball from 2011, but the 2014 run, God, it almost was not came to fruition because we almost lost to St. Joe's. I remember that game. Like, I remember everything about that. And the best thing I can tell you from a personal perspective about that year is I was teaching tennis at this point in my career, and there was a basketball pool that one of the dads of a student of mine put together, and they were all like Wisconsin fans. And that was the first pool where I won like easily going away because nobody had UConn winning at all. And of course, every pool I've ever done where UConn has been in the NCAA tournament, I have never not had at least 1 or 2 brackets where they're winning at all, even if I didn't think they had a true shot. So easily won that pool. So thank you, Shabazz Napier, for some extra money that time. And then you get into like, I feel like this level is Emeka Okafor, number 4. Not that Shabazz isn't on their level. They're all top 5 and kind of elite players. Emeka won national championship, was a national player of the year. I feel like if you beat Duke in the Final Four, you're automatically elevated, even though we're kind of surpassed Duke on the blue blood level now. But before we had it, let's just be honest, right? We were chasing them. Now they're behind us. So, but in these talks, I feel like Emeka beating that JJ Redick-led team and Chris Duhon, Sheldon Williams, Shavlik Randolph, poor him. He got destroyed once those guys were. Chris Horvath was the guy who got destroyed once the foul trouble happened. And shout out Jim Calhoun, the GOAT at UConn. I feel like Dan Hurley will surpass him at some point, but he's still the GOAT on the men's side for out-coaching Coach K, not once, but twice in a Final Four. And Emeka was part of that team. Number 3, Ray Allen. Easily the most accomplished UConn player of all time. Retired jersey. He's iconic. I mean, when you think of He Got Game, you think of Jesus Shuttlesworth. You think of, even if you go past the UConn stuff and his NBA career, he's the most recognizable, I think, UConn player in history. Some might argue the next 2 are also on that list, and number 2 is Rip Hamilton. And what I think was so interesting about this poll, it was described that Kemba is number 1, Rip is number 2. And essentially, it was like a virtual tie. Kemba got 1,486 votes. Rip Hamilton got 1,480. And it was merely because there was one ballot where Rip wasn't on it at all, which I think is kind of BS. So whoever that person is, if you don't have Rip Hamilton in your top 10, I think this is the only time I'm going to say I don't respect it. I just don't. It's just one of those things where really frustrating to not see that virtual tie, which essentially it is. Rip Hamilton, All-American, national champion, first national championship for UConn. Like I said, you beat Duke in a final. I think that kind of weighs heavier than say Kemba beating Butler. But guess what? At that point, it's just one of those things where I think that's where my heart goes. But I had Kemba number 1, too, I believe. Let's take a look. Kemba was 1. Listen, I named one of my dogs that is now not with me anymore. Had recently passed. That he was his name was Kemba. And yeah, my list had Kemba. So if we're talking my list against this full list, I'm going to pull it up and talk about it. It's pretty similar. I had number 10, Donyell Marshall. He was 7, I believe, on this list. Number 9, Chris Smith. I think he was 8. Khalid El-Amin was 11, and I had him at 8. Shabazz was 5. I had him at 7. Tristan was 6. I had Tristan at 6. Donovan was 5. I think Donovan was 9 in this poll. Ray was 4. Ray was 3 here. Richard Hamilton was 3. He's 2 here. Emeka Okafor was 2 for me, and Kemba Walker was 1. So I feel like I was pretty lockstep with UConn Twitter. Hopefully it's not the first time, won't be the last. But Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Now it's also available on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Before we go, just to reiterate, from now on, every episode of the podcast, every cent that is made on this podcast will be 10% of that will be donated to Bleeding Blue for Good. I've already made the arrangements in an email. I'm getting connected with the folks there, and I will be sending a monthly donation from Locked On UConn, myself personally, to continue to give back to the program that I love and the program that does so right by me. And I really appreciate everyone's support. Go get a subscription to the Subtext Insider Everydayer program. Helps us donate more money to Bleeding Blue for Good. This has been another episode of Locked On UConn. I'm your host, Mark Zanetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay connected, make sure your toughness meter is always rising. And as always, go Huskies.